You want to talk about economic roller coasters? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into Argentina's wild ride.
It's a story that's got it all right. Political drama, controversial policies, and enough economic jargon to make your head spin.
You got that right. And the plot thickened recently with Javier Milei taking the reins as president. Our listeners are hungry for insights on his economic game plan, so that's exactly where we're headed today.
Milei's a fascinating figure, no doubt. His policies are definitely shaking things up, and not everyone's thrilled about it.
That's putting it mildly. We're kicking off our deep dive with an opinion piece from Spain's El País newspaper. And let me tell you, they do not hold back. Their headline basically screams, "Argentina under Milei, from bad to worse."
Oof, yeah, they definitely went there. El País pulls no punches. And to really hammer home their point, they brought in an economist with, shall we say, a colorful history.
This is getting juicy. Don't leave us hanging, spill the tea. What's the backstory on this economist?
Let's just say their views are deeply rooted in a school of thought that clashes, big time, with everything Milei stands for.
Okay, so we've got some potential for bias right out of the gate. Gotta love a good dose of intrigue. But before we get lost in the weeds of this economist's resume, let's back up and unpack El País's main argument. They paint a pretty bleak picture, but they do acknowledge a few glimmers of hope in Argentina's economic data.
Right. They couldn't completely ignore the numbers, could they?
Exactly. So what's their big BUT? What's the dark cloud hanging over these glimmers of hope?
Well, their main gripe seems to be Argentina's shrinking GDP. They're waving that around like a red flag, even going so far as comparing current GDP figures to the good old days under the previous Peronist government.
The classic, it was better before argument. But as any seasoned economics enthusiast knows, GDP alone doesn't tell the whole story.
100%. It's like judging a book by its cover. Sure, GDP is one indicator of economic health, but especially during times of major economic overhaul like what Milei is attempting, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Right. It's about context, isn't it? Well, so let's talk context. Milei's big on something he calls macroeconomic sanitation, which, let's be honest, sounds a tad intense. Break it down for us. What's he actually trying to do?
Imagine you inherit a house. On the surface, it's got some curb appeal, maybe a fresh coat of paint. But underneath, the foundation is crumbling, the wiring is shot, and the plumbing is a disaster waiting to happen. You could just slap on some wallpaper and call it a day, but those underlying issues are going to rear their ugly heads eventually.
And that's where the sanitation comes in. You're ripping everything out and starting from scratch.
Essentially, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Milei's trying to fix those deep-rooted problems that have plagued Argentina's economy for decades. Rampant inflation, unsustainable debt, inefficient government spending. It's about creating a solid foundation for long-term stability, even if it means some short-term pain.
Like ripping off a Band-Aid. It stings at first, but then the healing can begin.
Exactly. And that's why relying solely on GDP as the barometer for success right now is misleading. When you're gutting and renovating a house, there's bound to be dust, debris, and a whole lot of mess. It doesn't mean the renovation is a failure. It means you're in the messy middle of a much-needed transformation.
So El País leading with the shrinking GDP argument, it's like they're focusing on the pile of rubble in the front yard and ignoring the brand new plumbing being installed inside.
Precisely. They're choosing a narrative and sticking to it, even if it means downplaying or outright ignoring other crucial pieces of the puzzle. And that brings us back to our economist with the shall we say, relevant background.
Oh, yeah. We got to circle back to that. It's like El País hired a master chef with a known distaste for spicy food to judge a chili cook-off.
Now, I wouldn't go that far, but you're picking up what we're laying down, right? Their perspective is important, but we got to consider their potential blind spots.
Always. And that's where we're diving into our next source, an article from the Argentinian newspaper, Clarín. They've got a fascinating profile on this El País economist, Alfredo Serrano Mancia. And get this, he's no stranger to the halls of power in Latin America.
Understatement of the year, this guy's been advising some major players.
QGE names.
The biggest.
Okay, you're killing me with the suspense. Tell us, who has this economist advised?
Well, for starters, he was a close advisor to Hugo Chavez during his time as president of Venezuela.
Whoa. Okay, so we're talking about a very specific economic ideology here.
Very specific, and very much at odds with everything Milei is trying to do in Argentina.
Talk about a clash of titans. We're talking about two completely different visions for how an economy should function.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to understand the motivations and potential biases of the voices weighing in on Argentina's economic transformation.
Because everyone's got an agenda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even, dare I say, us. But fear not, dear listeners, because that's exactly why we're here, to equip you with all the information and context you need to form your own informed opinions.
And trust me, there's a lot more to unpack.
Oh, we're just getting started. We'll be back after a quick break to dive into the nitty-gritty of Argentina's economic data and see if we can separate the signal from the noise. Stay tuned. All right, so we've got this skeptical economist in the picture, potentially viewing Milei's every move through a very particular lens. But let's not forget, even El País admitted there have been some positive economic shifts under Milei's leadership. They almost seemed hesitant to bring it up, like those positive indicators were throwing a wrench in their whole doom and gloom narrative.
Yeah, it's almost like they snuck those in at the last minute.
Right, like, oh, and by the way, inflation is down, but don't get too excited about it.
Exactly. They definitely buried the lead there.
So let's unearth it, shall we? Because I'm all about digging into the details. El País might want to gloss over the good stuff, but I say we break out the magnifying glass and see what's really going on in Argentina's economy.
Love that. Let's start with the big one, the one that keeps Argentinians up at night: inflation.
Inflation, the silent wealth destroyer.
No kidding. Before Milei took office, Argentina's inflation rate was hovering around a staggering 12.8%. Can you imagine trying to budget, run a business, or even just plan for the future with that kind of uncertainty?
It'd be like trying to hit a moving target in a hurricane.
The perfect analogy. But here's the kicker under Milei. In just a few short months, inflation has plummeted to 4.2%. Now, that's still higher than many developed economies, but the speed and direction of that change are noteworthy, to say the least.
That's a massive drop. It's like going from a 5-alarm fire to a controlled burn.
Precisely. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Remember that whole exchange rate gap thing we talked about earlier, where you get a wildly different exchange rate for dollars at the bank versus on the street?
Oh yeah, that was a wild concept to wrap my head around, talking about economic chaos.
Well, under Milei, that gap has narrowed dramatically. We're talking from a whopping 150% to 200% down to 29%. Again, not perfect, but a huge step towards stability and predictability.
So less volatility, more confidence in the system. That's huge for businesses and investors, right?
Absolutely. It's like night and day. And while we're on the topic of positive shifts, let's look at Argentina's net international reserves.
Okay, so full transparency, net international reserves. Sounds a bit like financial jargon to me. Could you break that down for those of us who didn't major in economics?
Think of it like a country's savings account. A healthy savings account gives you a cushion to deal with unexpected expenses, economic shocks, that sort of thing. When Milei stepped in, Argentina's savings account was in the red by about $14 billion. Still negative today, but down to $6 billion, a significant improvement in a short period.
So they're not rolling in dough yet, but at least they're not drowning in debt.
Exactly. And they're swimming in the right direction. It shows a commitment to fiscal responsibility, which is something international lenders and investors look for.
It's all about building trust, right? Showing the world that Argentina is serious about getting its financial house in order.
You got it. And speaking of getting their house in order, let's talk about Argentina's public deficit. That was another one of those economic terms that El País kept throwing around.
Right, but this time it sounds like they might actually have a point.
Yeah, in 2023, the deficit was 4.4% of GDP, which is not sustainable long-term. But get this, under Milei, they've managed to pull off a remarkable turnaround.
Let me guess, they reduced the deficit.
They did more than reduce it. They flipped the script entirely. Argentina now has a budget surplus.
A surplus? Wait, are we still talking about Argentina?
Yep, you heard that right. It's a small surplus, but a surplus nonetheless. This suggests that Milei's approach to fiscal discipline, things like cutting government spending and reining in subsidies, might actually be working.
It's like going from maxing out your credit cards every month to actually paying them off and having a little left over in your bank account. It takes discipline, but the payoff can be huge.
Tell me about it. And this newfound fiscal discipline seems to be having a ripple effect. Remember country risk, that measure of how risky it is to lend money to a particular country.
Oh yeah, that was another indicator that El País was all doom and gloom about.
For good reason. Before Milei took charge, Argentina's country risk was a terrifying 2,600 basis points. Think of it like having a terrible credit score. Lenders are hesitant to give you loans, and if they do, the interest rates are sky high. But under Milei, that risk has been cut in half, down to 1,360 basis points.
Okay, so still a work in progress, but a 50% reduction in risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to count for something.
Oh, it definitely counts for something. A lower country risk means Argentina can potentially access loans at much more favorable terms, which gives them more breathing room to implement reforms and stimulate economic growth.
So less risk, more potential for growth. Got it.
Hmm.
But what about the average Argentinian business owner? Are they feeling these positive shifts, or is it still too early to tell?
That's where bank credit comes in. Access to credit is the lifeblood of a healthy economy. It allows businesses to invest, expand, hire more workers, all those things that contribute to a thriving economy. Before Milei, let's just say bank lending to businesses in Argentina was practically non-existent. The risk was just too high.
What's changed?
Well, with the decrease in country risk and signs of greater economic stability, banks are starting to open their coffers again. In just 8 months under Milei, bank lending to businesses has more than doubled.
Wow. That's got to be music to the ears of Argentinian entrepreneurs. It's like someone finally turned the lights back on.
Exactly. It's a sign that there's renewed confidence in Argentina's economic future, which is crucial for attracting foreign investment too. Speaking of which.
Argentina's foreign trade balance. Got to talk about it. We know we rely heavily on exports, so this one's a biggie. What's the story there? Hit us with the numbers.
All right, so before Milei, Argentina was facing a $7 billion trade deficit, meaning they were importing way more than they were exporting. This puts immense pressure on a country's foreign currency reserves and can weaken its currency. But hold on to your hats because under Milei, they've managed to pull off a complete 180, achieving a $12.2 billion trade surplus.
Wait, from a $7 billion deficit to a $12.2 billion surplus, that's not just flipping the script, it's rewriting the entire play. How did they manage that?
It seems Milei's policies aimed at boosting exports and attracting foreign investment are already showing results. This turnaround suggests that Argentina is becoming more competitive on the global stage and its products are in high demand.
So we've gone from a pretty scathing critique by El País to some surprisingly positive economic indicators. It feels like Argentina is walking this tightrope between its tumultuous past and the potential for a brighter economic future. It's like a real-life economic thriller. So we've got this mixed bag of skepticism from seasoned economists and some genuinely positive economic indicators coming out of Argentina. What's the takeaway? Where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Have we turned a corner? Are we witnessing a remarkable turnaround? Or is this just a temporary blip on Argentina's long and bumpy economic road?
Because let's be real, Argentina has had these moments of economic promise before, only to see them fizzle out. So how can we tell if this time is different? What should we be paying attention to in the coming months and years to really gauge the long-term impact of Milei's strategy?
We need to look beyond the headlines, beyond the GDP figures and inflation rates. The real test is whether these positive trends translate into tangible improvements for everyday Argentinians.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's about people's lives.
Exactly. Will we see wages increase? Will more jobs be created? Will poverty rates decline? Those are the metrics that truly matter.
Those are the signs of real, sustainable progress.
Because Argentina's economic and social fabric has been through a lot, the true measure of Milei's success will be whether he can heal those wounds, whether he can create a more equitable and prosperous future for all Argentinians.
It's about more than just numbers on a balance sheet. It's about people's lives, their livelihoods, their hopes, their dreams. So as we continue to follow this economic experiment unfolding in Argentina, let's keep that bigger picture in mind. Let's look beyond the headlines, beyond the political rhetoric, and ask ourselves, are these changes making a real difference in the lives of the Argentinian people? That's what we should all be asking.
Couldn't agree more. It's complex, it's nuanced, and it requires us to stay engaged, informed, and maybe even a little bit skeptical.
Skepticism is good. It keeps us honest. It makes us dig deeper, ask tough questions, and form our own informed opinions. And that's what this deep dive is all about. We've given you the information, the context, and hopefully a few things to ponder as you continue to follow Argentina's economic journey. As always, stay curious, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that matters.